welcome everybody. It's so great to be with you, although, not in person like we've been used to, but great to meet nonetheless. And before we kick off, I just want to acknowledge that um, I'm hosting this webinar today on beautiful Larrakia country. Please note my absence of a jumper in Darwin, 31 degrees. And Nicole, my colleague, is also joining us from which country, Nicole?
On Norigo country, Sally, thank you. And
Great.
very much jumper country here in the Snowy Mountains.
And I also want to recognise the traditional owners of the countries where you are all linking in from today, and any First Nations people on the webinar today. And it would also be quite lovely if you might just put into the chat function what country you're on, where you're coming from today. So just put that in there, so it's a great kind of account of the sort of bigger coverage that we've got and where people are from. So that would be lovely if you can pop that in there. So this is the first of two webinars that we're going to be doing, which is in follow-up to the IRCF evaluation that Matrix has worked with FRRR on over the last number of years. And the session today is going to look at unpacking perhaps what is the benefits of evaluation generally, but also to look at designing a process for evaluation. The session on Thursday will be looking at the actual outcomes and learnings from the IRCF pilot project that was done, and that was looking at the learnings in Junee, Leeton and Nambucca Valley. And we'll also look at how the learnings from that evaluation could be used by organisations going forward, and how to make the most of having been involved in that evaluation. So two sessions. And today's very much a foundational look at evaluation. It's also pretty relaxed. We're going to go for about, it's an hour and a half, the session, and we are going to do a bit of work in it, and I'm keen to be able to get questions as we go along. So please feel free to either wave at me or put a question in the chat. And I just want to acknowledge before we get into things, so you all know Nancy. Nancy, of course, is in the call. Nicole, my colleague, she's probably going to monitor the chat. We've also got Deb from FRRR, and we've also got Carolyn from FRRR down the South Coast. And have we also got Monique? So what I wanted to do today in this session was to look for a little bit around what we understand evaluation is and why we would want to do it. Then have a bit of a look at some of the design considerations when you're looking at an evaluation. And then also look at some of the tools that you might use. And we're going to specifically look at two things called theory of change and program logic. And then we're going to actually develop a short evaluation plan for a couple of your own programs. And we'll use some breakout groups for that. Before we kick off, just, we're with Matrix and we work with nonprofit organisations. And this is sort of a list of the kind of things we do. And program evaluation is in there. And I suppose the other thing I just wanted to bring to your attention is that this is all kind of capacity building work. So in your own organizations, you're working on governance and strategic planning and policies. And I would encourage you to think of evaluation as one of the other things that you might do in your organization to build capacity and sustainability. It's like one of your tools in your organization. It's not necessarily a special one-off thing that you do, but it's something that you might do ongoingly and as part of your organizational kind of business per se. So I just wanted to sort of frame that up like that. So in terms of the evaluation that we have done with the IRCF program, and we'll dig more into this on Thursday, but just to give you a bit of context, is there was a theory of change for this program, and another organization called Good Wolf developed that. We worked with FRRR to develop the IRCF monitoring and evaluation framework and plan. And then over the last number of years, that plan has been implemented. So for many of you, you've been involved in the pilot project in Junee, Leeton and Nambucca. And in the South Coast, their evaluation is just about to come up to the last data collection in Shoalhaven and Bay and Basin. And then we've also done a smaller project with Bigger Valley, Glen Innes and Taree. I just wanted you to take a moment and maybe if you're in a call where there's several people in the call in the one room together, or if you've got a piece of paper just yourself, just take a moment to just reflect on, for you, what do you understand is evaluation? What is that for you? And why might you want to do an evaluation? So it would be really great to hear a couple of your responses. Anybody who wants to share, just to unmute yourself. It'd be great to get a sense of what you understand it is and why you might want to do one.
No comments?
Yeah. Hi, Gail. G'day. Great to see you
Hi.
again.
And all of you. Well, I think it's important to keep track of and make you accountable for what the money has been given to us for, and to prove that you've actually completed or done what you said you were going to do with that funding.
Yeah, great. So there's an accountability thing there for you, which is very important, and we'll touch on that a bit more. So that's great. Gail, is there any reason why you might not want to do an evaluation?
The funding is something that we haven't got ourselves. We've been granted it, and it's important as a thank you as much as anything as well to those that have given that money.
Yeah, great.
And to help the community, to help our association particularly, but also a spin-off to the rest of the community.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Gail. Auntie Ruth, I can see the hand up from the Mudjay Gunma room.
When I asked, when I explained what evaluation is, the first thing Auntie Ruth said was, "Don't we do that every day?" In our talking, which we do. I think probably we don't think as much around money as we do around purpose. And so our discussions on a daily basis are about what we're doing, how we're doing it, and a thing around timeliness, because I think time management is something we're finding is kind of important with the many things that we're doing here.
Yeah. And so you're taking almost like an evaluation mindset in all of the interactions in terms of that reflective thinking all the time, not just designating now we're going to do that as a standalone project, but more of a mindset approach.
That's right. And it's yes, it's constant here. And I think that's so in fact, when we just started discussing it, the idea was, oh my God, we don't call it that. But then again, it's consistent with the values in the culture, which is that everything's so connected. If we start separating everything out, we start to see gaps. Well, we don't get that relation between everything.
Mm.
And so we operate this way.
Yeah. No, great. Thanks, Jeanette. Anybody else? One more and then we'll keep on going. It's great to get a sense of where this is sort of landing for people. Yes, Deirdre, great.
I'll say something. Not terribly different from what was just said. What I put down was evaluation is a opportunity to reflect on what's worked and what maybe didn't work, what was maybe achieved through what we were doing, and it is sort of happening all the time, like we just said. And often another part of evaluation is what's been achieved, what was intended, or were there other things that were achieved along the way that maybe weren't intended? And also, is there anything that we do differently next time? So,
yeah, great. Great. So this is, I just put something semi kind of official together, which confirms what the three of you have said. So it's really a process, however that happens, whether it's ongoing or whether it's a standalone thing of identifying, collecting, analysing information about what you might call a program. And a program could be a project, a policy, an organisation, an event, a training, something like that. And, you know, as you've said, it's like, is it meeting its objectives? Is it achieving what it set out to do or that you think you set out to do? Is it being done in the best way? Are there ways to improve? I just want to draw your attention to impact evaluation for a minute, because as you probably know, there are different kinds of evaluation that you can do depending on the nature of the thing that you're evaluating and where in the life cycle of the project or program you come in. And the general type of evaluation that we used in IRCF is something called an impact evaluation. And this was something where over a period of time, and we were really fortunate to be able to be involved in IRCF from the start, like in the case of the pilot project, observing changes or impact over time. And so I just wanted to sort of put that there in terms of this was sort of the general type of evaluation we did. The other note here is that this is a definition from the source there. And if you Google that, the word intervention is used there instead of program. And I've swapped out that word. And why I just wanted to bring this to your attention is no matter when you're doing evaluation, like any sort of program, you just need to be mindful of the context in which you're doing the work and being very mindful of language and impact of language when you're using it. So I'm in the Northern Territory, and in the Northern Territory, the word intervention is still quite a sharp word up here. It's one that we sort of often avoid using. When talking about things, we use something else. In other settings, you'd use the word intervention and not even give it a moment's thought. So we will talk a little bit about cultural considerations a bit further on, but I just sort of wanted to identify that, you know, for me, if I was sharing this definition up here with a group of people, I would swap out intervention and put the word program in because it creates a whole lot of other connotations that actually aren't useful. So let's go and build on a bit of what Gail was talking about in terms of the benefits. Now, there are lots of benefits And I really just pulled out 4. And some of these are what have already been mentioned, but I would be curious shortly to hear if there are other benefits for your organisation. So a key one, as been mentioned, is it's able to provide some evidence of something that you're doing so that you can use it to leverage something else. So it might be about advocating support for the program. It might be about showing evidence around the thing that you're doing has had an impact and has reached the people that we intended. And now we want to be able to use that as evidence in a grant application to secure more funds. Or we might use it to demonstrate that we've worked with another organisation and we've had success there, and that might build that partnership more. So there's an evidence piece. For non-for-profits with the charitable purpose, I think it's really important in terms of showing that your work is having an impact and that it contributes to building your reputation. And also, if you're an organisation that's wanting to grow donations or grow support, being able to show that the public trust you, and that builds confidence in you as an organisation, and the desire for people to want to support you is increased. And it's sort of connected to Gail's comment about accountability. So it's a tool to show that you are an entity who are accountable with funds and that you say that you deliver on what you did. So that ultimately builds trust. And so builds your profile and, to a certain extent, the story that you're wanting to communicate to others about you and the work that you do. It's also an opportunity to reflect and learn. I just want to pause there. Are there any other benefits that haven't been named, or any comment anyone wants to make in relation to these benefits?
I was going to say too, feel free to use the chat if you'd rather not speak, or if you've got noise in the background or something like that, and I'll keep an eye on that as well.
Great, thanks, Nicole. Oh.
While people are thinking about that question, Sally, I did just want to comment on that opportunity to reflect and learn. I think is so critical, and we don't often associate that with accountability as with evaluation as an internal process. So we often see it as we're demonstrating to others what we're doing, but we don't often think about the fact that evaluation really does give us a chance to sidestep around that, because we've always done it this way. So oftentimes you might, be delivering a project or a program and have been doing it the same way for quite a while and haven't had that opportunity to step back and say, well, why do we do it this way? And is it actually achieving the outcome or the outcomes that we were hoping for? And so it really gives you the chance to do that. And Sue's just commented, boosting morale and motivation of stakeholders by celebrating success and milestones. Yeah, that's a terrific example, Sue, of another value of evaluation.
And I think if you're an organisation that's wanting to grow your engagement in the wider community, being able to use it to demonstrate how others have been involved and acknowledging them is a great thing.
I think, Sally, just to build on Sue's comment and what you just mentioned there, I guess just to name that volunteering and volunteer engagement piece and celebrating your volunteers. And I guess I've definitely seen momentum in volunteer engagement where volunteers feel like they are having impact and that their energy and effort is leading to something, and they can see that.
Yeah, great. On Thursday, when we look at the learnings from the VFFF pilot program, part of that session is we'll look at, okay, so how might those organisations that have been involved in that evaluation use it in terms of maximising some of these benefits, and particularly some of the reflecting and, you know, learning things going forward.
And Deb, great comment about the opportunity for collaboration and continual co-design of programs that best meet community needs. Yeah, so checking in with your stakeholders and those opportunities for partnership around program design and delivery.
Yeah, great. Okay. All right, let's keep going. Thank you for putting those things in the chat. So in general, I suppose, you know, the purpose of an evaluation is to measure, to learn, to understand, to improve, and to provide some evidence. So what would be great, just to build on that, is, again, let's just do this on your own or in the groups that you're in the call. It would be great to just have a think about your organisation now. And again, just take 3 or 4 minutes to think about what benefits would there be to doing an evaluation of a program, a project, an event. And then what barriers might there be for you to do that? Because I'm very mindful that sometimes people might have had a bad experience of an evaluation before, and that might become a barrier. Or there might be other things that go, we just can't do that. So just take a moment to think, what benefits would there be for your organisation to do an evaluation of something? And then what barriers might there be? Pop, if there's someone who would like to share what they have written down, and someone who hasn't shared yet, that would be really great.
Hello, it's Mary from Leeton.
Hi, Mary. G'day.
I'm not sure if my video is working,
but I can hear you fine.
Okay, great. I have Brian with me as well from Leeton Connect.
Great.
And for us, the benefits of evaluation are improvement, tracking how we're travelling, and to help us to remain focused on our purpose.
Great. And what about barriers, Mary? Did you discuss that?
For me, time. for many reasons at the moment.
Because we're not for profit and volunteers.
Yeah.
Most of us to do with Leeton Connect, other than Mary, who's our coordinator, and she has limited hours.
Yeah, great. I'll just say something there about sustainability, because so this speaks to the time factor. So it's important in thinking, when you start looking at the design of an evaluation, you might go, is this something that we have capacity to do in-house, to do ourselves? And you might need to do that because you don't have the resources for it. And then you might go, okay, so how do we make that as easy as possible? How do we not set up a process that means that Mary has to write all these surveys, do all of this stuff, which she obviously doesn't have time to do? So thinking about, how do we make an evaluation process sustainable with our resources? And then if you do want to have an external evaluator do something, then that's fine. And you might need to get a grant for that or partner with someone to do that. But I encourage you, try and not be put off in naming the barriers, I think is important, because you'll come up against the barriers in the project somewhere if you haven't named them at the front end. So think about what's sustainable for you in terms of resourcing something like this. Who else would like to share?
Hello.
Hi there.
Go for it, Sue. Yeah.
So I've just written down further funding, stakeholder confidence, boosting morale, but a sense of achievement too. Also accountability and transparency, because you're answering maybe to a board or an accountant. And also when we report our financials every after our annual general meeting. And yeah, focusing on our purpose and barriers, time and funds, but also overcoming a barrier is put your evaluation costs in your grant agreement. That can help too.
Yeah, great. Yeah, great tip. I mean, I think this speaks to a mindset of evaluating what we do is just part of the way that we organize ourselves in delivering on our purpose and delivering on our core service delivery, is that there is an evaluation component. And so I think that's great, Sue, in terms of embedding whatever those, costs might be. I think that's a great way in terms of approaching that.
And from the Mujai Gunma team, some of the benefits: continual learning, managing challenges while moving forward, and barriers, potential barriers handled, worked with all the time. All this happens naturally in our informal evaluation discussions. Yeah, great. So
Yeah,
you deal
great.
with the barriers as they come up, and resolving them as you go.
Yeah, great. Okay. I just want to bring your attention to some things to consider. So when you're, and I acknowledge, I think we've got a beautiful picture of Leighton with Lake, courtesy of Nancy.
It's the wetlands. I've got a feeling.
The wetlands.
It might have been Paul Maton that took that photo.
So things to kind of think about is how some of the evaluation process or the outcomes and findings might affect some of the people involved. And that might be about, some of the information that comes to light or how they're involved. So just being mindful of people. And also in terms of challenging some of those barriers, then, I think being able to push through some of any resistance that people might feel about a program being evaluated. But I think what I've heard this morning is that there is a great sense around embedding evaluation into the culture of how we do things here, in terms of reflective listening and critiquing kind of as we're going. So I think that is a great way to kind of manage some of that potential resistance. Thinking about how you might encourage people to help collect data. Also, just being mindful you don't have something like what's called a confirmation bias, where you are thinking that you'll evaluate something and you think, oh, well, it'll just be all great because everyone's saying it's great. And then some of the data is actually showing that it's not great. And you need to have a willingness to recognize that, be open to that, respond to that, and work with that. Because ultimately, you're not wanting to do something just to show it's great. Like, you're genuinely wanting to evaluate it.
Yeah, and I think an important part of that too, Sally, is when you're designing your evaluation, even the questions that you ask people or the way that you frame up what it is that you're trying to find out. Sometimes, I often joke with people sometimes that, you can create a scale that's something like, how well do we do a certain thing? Can you rate us from really great to excellent? And that's a good example of, it's obviously a comical example, but it is really important to think about other questions that we're asking done in a way that does invite really honest feedback.
Yeah, great. And then, and then just thinking of who needs to be involved in this and what support do you need. A couple of other things in relation to designing. It was actually a real luxury in the IRCF pilot to be involved from the start, because often people think of evaluating a program at the end, and there's nothing wrong with that. That is a particular type of evaluation. It's called a post-evaluation. It comes in at the end. But there's something quite lovely about being able to start collecting data from the moment that the program or the thing is happening. And so if there is a way to be able to, if you're doing something that has got a beginning and an end, to be able to set it up at the front end is useful in terms of that thing you would have heard us refer to, baseline, which is like, well, what was the situation at the beginning before we started this project? And so then we can compare going forward. The kinds of things that you'll obviously be thinking about in designing is the measurements. It all becomes about what are we going to measure? What are the sort of indicators that might tell us if this program's working or not, if the training is having an impact or not, if young people are learning or not. Also have some mindfulness around, you might say, well, it'd be great to get that data, but in fact, it's going to be incredibly difficult to get that. So you want to be able to gather information that's possible. And then, as I've just alluded to, there are cultural considerations on all kinds of levels. And I really encourage you to understand the context in which you're doing work, whether there are language issues, and there's also always, or there's often ethics considerations that you need to be aware of. And sometimes things take in a turn that you didn't necessarily plan. And so you need to make sure that you're kind of flexible as information, comes to light and that sort of thing. I also just wanted to bring your attention to this document. So the Australian Evaluation Society, a number of years ago, developed a First Nations cultural safety framework. And this is a really great resource, which is available online. And I really encourage you, if you're working in any sort of First Nations context, that you just become aware of some of the concepts in this. I'm not going to talk about this in detail, but it sort of fits to when you're working in an evaluation space, being mindful of cultural considerations, but also being mindful of who you are as perhaps a non-Indigenous person working in an Indigenous setting, and what might you need to consider there to make sure that you're, not perpetuating something that you didn't intend in the course of doing the evaluation. So I encourage you to kind of have a look at that. It's very accessible, and I think just provides you with another set of, tools to make sure that your evaluation work, really meets the needs and has a good outcome. All right. So I'm just going to step into a, have we got something in the chat there? Or
So welcome, Monique. Great to have you here. And Nancy's just mentioned that the slides will be shared after the session. So if people are trying to frantically take notes or take photos of the screen or anything like that, the slides will be shared. Yep.
Yeah, great. Okay. I just want to step through 2 tools now, and hopefully the screens won't go too crazy with a bit of information on the screens, but I think we need to sort of introduce a couple of processes, tools here. So you might have heard us talk about theory of change. So there was a theory of change used in the IRCF. And another term that you've probably heard used, program logic or a logic model. And when you're planning an evaluation, essentially these two tools, let's say, are a way for you to get really clear at the front end about what are we actually evaluating here, and what kind of, thesis or idea are we proposing that this program that we're looking at, what effect it's having, what's our idea here, and what are the things we need to consider. So often you might just use one of these, but I have seen both of these used. So I just want to start by introducing the idea of a program logic. So it's really, it's usually a visual, and it's a way of mapping the connections between the different parts of your project. And I'm going to share the screen where we've got a sample. I think it makes it easier to understand. So this is an example of a program logic. And so you can see here that we have what's called inputs. So these are the things that might go into your program. So you might have funding, staffing, a partnership, a building. You might have someone doing the evaluation. Those inputs lead to a range of activities happening. Those activities have outputs. So outputs are actual things that you can measure. So you might have an activity is training up staff, and output is the number of staff trained. And then an outcome is actually the change that's happened that you can see. There's actual change in something. And then there's the impact, which is the longer term result as a result of your program. So if you were doing if you had a program and you went, okay, let's evaluate it, what you might do is make a list of inputs, a list of activities, outputs, and your evaluation, for example, might look at, are the outcomes that we thought this program was going to have, have they actually happened? Have those outcomes actually taken place? And so you might then be able to work back and go, well, let's look at what happened in the activities. Let's look at our outputs. Did we get a number of staff trained or not? So you kind of use the program logic as a way of identifying what might we exactly evaluate and what are the things that we might need to look at, what might be some of the measures that we need to look at that lead to outcomes. I'm going to put another slide on that might blow your mind, but this is actually one of the handouts that you've been sent. And I think this is quite a useful resource to have in your toolkit, because what it does is it just is the definition of each of those things in the example. And what it also has is the problem statement, which I think is quite good to kind of go, it sort of speaks to the why. So why do we need to do this evaluation? What's going on? So yeah, that's just a resource for you to be able to use. I'm just going to pause there for a minute. Are there any questions about what I've just shared in relation to program logic?
And again, feel free to use the chat if that's makes it easier for you.
Can I just check in? Has anyone ever used a program logic? Because often what happens is a program, you could have a program logic whether you were going to evaluate the program or not. So if you were starting a new program where you were wanting to, encourage like a training program, or you were wanting to, develop a certain learning environment for in a childcare centre or that kind of thing, you might, in designing the program at the front end, a program logic is a really useful tool. And so then you've sort of got it in place. If you then want to evaluate, you can, but it's actually quite a good design tool separate to even doing an evaluation.
Yeah, thanks, Nancy. So Nancy's just saying that program logic template's really useful to have the definitions to keep coming back to. Yeah, it's a great template to have handy.
Right. And
Thanks.
has anyone ever used a program logic before?
So you've been using them?
Great. So in terms of, when, so you would use in relation to program logic, you would use it when you're planning or managing a specific program or project. It's a useful actual communication tool to be able to say, we do this and it leads to this. Obviously, in monitoring and evaluation, as we're talking about, it also helps, I think, in your project in looking at any potential gaps. And it's most useful in terms of something where you actually know many of the components already. So the IRCF didn't have a program logic at the front end, because some of the things, we knew some of the inputs, but we didn't necessarily know, we had an idea around the outcomes. And some of the inputs, actually, we didn't know all of the inputs at the start. Some of those inputs actually and activities evolved in the course of the project. Going forward, we could probably do a program logic now. And that's why IRCF actually, I understand, probably has got a theory of change rather than a program logic.
Thanks for Monique, thanks for letting us know for your comments. Sometimes grants have questions around a number of these areas, so it feels like we've been very close to drafting this. Yeah, that's great. It's a great tool to help you get really clear if you do have a grant application that you're putting in, just even as a bit of a brainstorming activity almost, to get really clear on what you're going to talk about in your grant application. I'm curious, Sue, you said you've been using program logics, and you commented, although I do cheat a bit with them. Can you just really quickly tell us what you mean by that? Because I feel like maybe this is going to make it a bit more accessible for people. It might demystify a little bit. If you want to unmute yourself and just let us know. Oh, yeah, no problems. We'll give you a sec.
I mean, this is very much a program planning tool as much as it is a precursor to an evaluation. It's kind of a good tip if you are, it's good to ask if you're coming new to an organisation, it's great to ask whether a program logic exists for anything. It may not, but if it does, it's a really helpful way. It might be something that someone did once and they go, oh yeah, I prepared this once, and it's like absolute gold.
Yeah, beautiful. So Sue, you've got
Sue.
Yeah. Sorry, I couldn't find all the buttons to unmute. And
That's all right.
yeah, look, to be honest, we cheat a bit with them because Natalie Bramble in one of our grant writing workshops showed us how to use GPT, sorry. So we pop that in and it spits it out in about 10 seconds. Yeah. So
yeah, right. Okay.
So sorry.
No, that's great. And look, it would be interesting for people if they do use something like AI, so Chat GPT or a similar tool, to give that a go, but then also to really have a look at what has been spat out to see, you know, to make sure that, yes, this is actually, like, it might be a great starting point, and just to make sure that it is actually what, you know, what it is that your program logic should look like. But
Yeah.
you know, certainly as a starting point, you know, if people are feeling a bit stumped, then you know, why not?
Yeah, I mean, as the you know, I would just really encourage, I suppose it's about making sure you don't not have the conversation. So it's the conversation with your colleagues around these things, which is kind of the gold, really. Yeah. Any other comments on program logic before we move to theory of change? Great. Okay, so let's go to theory of change, which is another form of looking at, okay, we want to evaluate something, and what's our idea here? We've got this idea that if we do this, it might lead to that. Now, a theory of change is a little bit more higher level, and it might be for something where you don't necessarily have all of the information yet, but it's an idea. Again, this is something an organisation can have a theory of change as part of their toolkit of strategic documents and their marketing material. You don't only use it in the context of evaluation. And so, again, it really looks at the links between what you're proposing you're going to do and what the impact is, and how, and this is sort of where it gets into evaluation, the kind of causal link. So if we do this, it might lead to that, and then we might have that outcome. So it's that propositional sort of idea. And it also starts to unpack a little bit more around what are the assumptions that we have about something? And perhaps the evaluation might start to test those assumptions. So let me share an example. So this is actually a theory of change for an organisation called CAST, and they use this in their marketing material. And so the way that you might read this document is that, whoops, not there yet. So this crew start with their work. So network building, digital, they do capability programs, creating digital resources. It then goes to, you know, building social impact organizations, develop the skills, relationships, knowledge, and confidence to apply digital ways of working. So it kind of builds agency in the organizations they're working with, which then leads to an increased presence for those organizations. So their idea is that our work builds agency, which increases presence, which then leads to greater influence for those organizations, and therefore those organizations have greater impact. So that's the idea behind their organisation, the theory of change of their organisation and why it exists. And so if this organisation wanted to evaluate their whole thing, they could go, well, is it right that, you know, increased presence then leads to increased influence in those organisations? So this is sort of it's quite a lovely, and it's quite a simple. I quite like the way this is visual. I mean, I quite like theory of change in the sense that you can maximize visuals, and you also get the idea in a flow. I'll just share this one, which is probably familiar to most of you. So this is the IRCF theory of change. And so, again, it's a bit of a similar idea where this is like the why. So because rural, regional and remote non-for-profits need more time, resources and funding to reach their potential, the IRCF model looks at providing funding and interventions dedicated to strengthening systems, efficiency, strategy, and people. And then it leads to the supporting factor. So collaboration and higher functioning organisations, so they're more resilient to shocks. This leads to stronger, more resilient organisations fulfilling their mission, and then leading to the last one, which is resulting in higher functioning, more viable, more sustainable non-for-profits, So when we then worked on this in terms of the evaluation plan, we picked up from the point of providing, and you'll be familiar there of the pillars: systems, efficiency, strategy, and people. And so the evaluation that we worked with you on was starting to try and unpack, well, if you do fund and put emphasis into those areas of systems, efficiency, strategy, and people, does it have those other outputs and outcomes?
I just wanted to comment too that what I love about the FRRR IRCF theory of change, as it's shown here, is just the plain language that because of this, we provide this, and this supports, and that leads to, and then this is the outcome, or this is the impact. So it doesn't have to be, doesn't have to be something that's super wordy or written in complicated language. You can create a theory of change in really simple, plain language that works for your organisation. Well, you need to, that you want it to be in plain language that works for your organisation. So, but I love this, this plain language that's in here. Because, many people could pick this up and just see the links between what's the reason behind, all the way through to what's the intended outcome.
Are there any queries in the chat there? I saw a chat numbers increase.
Sue's just let us know she's had to go.
Okay. All right. I'm just going to go to when. So you'd use a theory of change when designing something that might have some transformative or systemic change. And so I think this is where this fits for me with IRCF in terms of something that weren't quite sure where it was going to go at the beginning, but it was a proposition of something transformative that might happen. It's something where you want to try and unpack some assumptions because we think this might happen. It is a way of kind of unpacking some complex things. And it's also, I think it's good in terms of some bigger picture stuff. And I think it's quite energizing in terms of, we reckon if this happens, then it might lead to that.
And Monique's just commented that the theory of change, and Monique, I'm assuming you're referring to the IRCF one, that it appears to be not too prescriptive and it allows communities to grow in their own way. And that ties into what you were just saying, Sally, about, you know, that it can be, you know, something that grows and adapts, or allows community to grow and adapt, or whoever's on the receiving end of the services or program or whatever.
I think it's also quite a good tool to use just in terms of your own organisation, in terms of your why and why you exist. It's quite energising, particularly also in terms of your communication to potential members and community members who get inspired by your vision, because it's kind of another way of articulating the vision in a way. But in an evaluation way, it's like, well, this is what we think we are wanting to do in the impact. So then now let's test it. So I want to go into doing something. And the pathway to that is, we've got these tools which you might use in terms of setting up your why and what your proposition is and what's the thing you want to look at. And then how do you do it? Now, this is very nuts and bolts. And again, has a project planning feel to it. But I think in terms of, okay, so we want to do an evaluation that might be, you know, we want to plan it. We either we want to mindfully plan it and apply for funds to do it, or we want to do it in-house. And these are the things we need to consider. So the evaluation plan is really like the implementation plan. How are we going to do it? There's a couple of key things here. I mean, this is really the how, what, when, why piece. I really encourage you to, even if you don't use a theory of change or a program logic, get really clear on why you're doing the evaluation, not just because a funding body says you've got to evaluate it. I mean, that might be one of the whys, but you need to get in touch with why it brings value. And I also really encourage you to spend time thinking about who the document or who the evaluation outcomes are for. So is it just for a funding body? Is it to communicate to your broader community? Because that then determines format. It determines language. And so have that conversation at the front end. The other piece where you'll spend probably most of your time is working out what questions you might ask. What's the point of inquiry? And you'll have a big list, and then you might refine it down to a small list. Work out how you might find out. And what's the nature of data collection? And then how are you going to make sense of the data? So in the case of Mujay Gunma, you guys might go, okay, well, we've been reflecting on our practice all the way through, but maybe mid-year we pause and we have a lunch and we think about where all that thinking is now and what point have we got to. So have a think about how you're going to actually analyze your data, and then think about, well, who will you share this with and how might you share it? The fun parts, and I'm going to show some fun photos in a minute, is the data collection methods. So the photo here is, we held some external stakeholder breakfasts, which probably none of you were involved in because there were other stakeholders, was with external parties, but that was a data collection method. So there is all kinds of data collection. And again, you need to choose a method which fits your audience, what kind of data, what's achievable, all of those things.
Sally, would you mind just giving a bit more detail about the purpose of the external stakeholder group for the IRCF program?
Yeah.
I think there's something in that could be valuable in terms of who you have the conversations with.
Yeah. So when the evaluation plan was designed, we were keen to be able to capture the perspective and the voice of people who weren't directly involved in any of the funded projects, but were still members of the wider community in which an organisation did their work. And we're keen just to get an external perspective on what they saw taking place in organisations, what impact organisations were having, what they were sort of observing might also be changes in the community at large. So it was about being able to get sort of an external perspective on a community, and also to an extent the nature of the work of the funded organisations. But we were really, those breakfasts which happened, aside from a few COVID cancellations, they took place and were quite fascinating in terms of giving an external view on what was happening in communities, the nature of the work that non-for-profits were doing. Yeah, it just provided something, a broader perspective. And it also became a great way actually to advocate for those non-for-profit organisations, because we were able to say, are you aware that X is doing this, and that kind of thing. We also, of course, did the community workshops, which you're familiar with, and integrated the Harwood evidence of community change tool into that. And then, yeah, also, again, the community workshop, looking at, you guys would all remember doing these activities, kind of looking at what else needs to happen in this community, that sort of thing. So again, the data collection tools were quite specific to the nature of, what we were looking at. So let's step into the dark side and attempt some breakout rooms. So what I'm going to ask Nancy to put you into, say, 5 groups. And basically your task is to design a basic evaluation plan for one program. What you need to do in your groups is, once you get into your group, decide who would like to nominate a project or a program or an event or something that you would like to evaluate. And in the chat, you would have been sent a template. The template is really a little bit more of a detailed work plan based on the guiding questions that are on the screen. And the idea is that in your group, you decide, yep, we're doing this thing with, encouraging, trialing young people coming and volunteering at aged care facility. We'll do our program, please. And so we just need somebody in the group to have the template. And in the time that we've got, we might take about 10 minutes. Let's try and fill out that template as much as possible in terms of what it's asking you. It's not overly long. And in each of your group, we'll have probably Nancy, myself, Nicole, Carolyn, and Deb to help with that. So divide into groups, decide on what project you want to look at, complete the template, and then it'd be great before we wrap up to be able to have people feedback on some of that. And while Nancy's getting bits and bobs together, some things, get clear, How might you use it as an opportunity? Who'll do the evaluation? Just a few little tips there. So let's go there, Nancy. Slides now.
Terrific.
Right. So I'm mindful of the time, but I am keen to hear at least maybe from one group who might just want to share the outcome from their activity and their planning. Yeah. Does anybody want to be brave?
I was the scribe for our group, so I can give you a very quick summary. We focused on a evaluation project for the Roundhouse Museum in Junee. They're upgrading a carriage. And so the purpose around that, in terms of applying for funding and getting that carriage upgraded, the evaluation plan purpose is around capturing the restoring of heritage, returning visitor increase, quality experience. The Roundhouse has a theory of change. They've got a strategic plan. So I think they'd be drawing from that in terms of the development of the theory of change and the program logic. And then in terms of what we just had, we documented 3 questions. The one question would be about the visibility and the appreciation of how it once was. So what do you know from the past? And what are you recalling now from your experience at the Roundhouse? Education, did you learn something? And have you visited previously? So that's as far as we go.
Yeah, great. Great. I feel like I want to hear from one other group while we've just done that activity. Anybody else want to share their evaluation plan?
There was a great discussion that happened in our group, and Mary, I'm wondering whether you'd be prepared to share some of what was talked about.
No.
Would you like me to?
No. Well, if you like, I'm just going to read from some of my notes, I guess.
Perfect. That would be great.
All right. So we talked about volunteer engagement program, or more specifically, employee volunteers program. So we'd be looking at tracking the success of this program and checking in with our audience, and we're looking at not-for-profits as well as business to help the program grow, and to report on how the program is going. Some of the questions would be around, who was actually involved from business, from not-for-profits. I guess volunteer hours, what projects were achieved or completed, and then we'd ask things like, did they get value from the project? What were their learnings? What are the benefits of being involved, and what were the barriers in either being involved or not being involved? We would measure things like, I think I mentioned before, the number of organisations, not for profit and business, that were involved, the number of volunteers, the number of volunteer hours. And I guess an online survey would be a good way of doing that. And then we'd report it through our regular newsletters, and I guess using graphs or infographics would be a good way of sharing that data.
One thing, Mary, it just came to mind then, I recently saw an evaluation that was done in a community that was looking at a particular space, and they actually printed up on a sandwich board out the front of the building the outcomes of the evaluation on a big kind of A1 sandwich board. So anybody walking past could see, we evaluated the program and these were some of the outcomes volunteer hours were up by this, da, 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 da. So you didn't have to seek out the evaluation to get the data. It was there in the public domain on a sandwich board out the front. So if you'd had anything to do with that entity, you were like, oh, that's what's happened. Because sometimes people participate in evaluations and then they never hear anything about it.
Yeah, great idea. And I guess it would have to be something that could be read very, very quickly as people pass by, like a graph or a infograph or something like that.
Yeah. Hey, look, I'm going to wrap up because we said an hour and a half. So I just want to acknowledge that there are other groups who also answered those questions, and hopefully that's provided some value for you in terms of actually perhaps planning to do one of those evaluations, or at least unpacking the project a bit. So in terms of this session, I'm going to bring this to a close. So I would really encourage you to please use those handouts, and especially the template if you're looking at planning. And then also on the screen, again, we'll send these slides. These were just a few things that I've picked out in terms of links to other sites that I think will have some useful resources for you. And then, yeah, down the bottom, there's that cultural safety framework document. So, yeah, please add that to your toolbox of things. And the next time, hopefully we might all see all of you together, is on Thursday, where we'll do a bit of a deep dive into the learnings and some of the recommendations and findings and such from the pilot, and also look at how those organisations could use those evaluation findings to progress some things for yourselves. So that's what's ahead on Thursday. Before we wrap up, I just wanted to ask, are there any questions from anybody or any comments anybody wanted to make?
Yeah, Sally, while others are thinking, I just want to let you know, just in the chat, just a comment from Deb, working in that group with Mujaganma. Beautiful, important insight from the breakout room with the team from Mujaganma is that Aboriginal people are not always comfortable with questions. They can feel pointy and disconnected. Instead, ask for the interconnected story. Thanks so much for sharing that. Really wise from that group. Carolyn's just asked, is there a tool you might suggest for post-evaluation?
Let me think on that. I mean, I think narrative, a narrative storytelling approach can have some value there, because everybody would have had some involvement in something, and they can use the reflection of this happened to me in this, or this is how I felt about that. So I think storytelling is a valuable thing. I think making sure that you do a baseline is important for, I mean, obviously that will be important at the end, but if you haven't been able to garner, a baseline, then you are really trying to capture from people the reality of kind of, where they are now. But if there's something in particular in terms of that, that's kind of an outcomes evaluation approach where you look at something at the end. I can certainly share any tool that I find in relation to that, Carolyn.
Thanks, Sally. That's wonderful. We have little projects within the big project.
Yes, yeah.
Thanks.
All right. Are there any other questions before we wrap up? No, great. Okay, well, let's finish. Thank you, everybody, for coming and joining today. I know we could go for like 5 hours on this, but we're not. So hopefully we will see everybody again on Thursday. And yeah, other than that, great to see you all online. And yeah, have a great rest of the week, and hopefully see you on Thursday. Thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Thanks, Sally. Oh.
Bye.